I'm Kimber Sider. I'm the artistic director of the Guelph Film Festival. So I'm going to moderate today. And we have director Mikaela Roberts. Mikaela is a 24-year-old Toronto-born filmmaker who grew up in Basel, Switzerland before moving back to Canada to pursue her university studies. She graduated with a BFA in film production from Concordia University's Mel Hoppenheim School of Cinema in Montreal, Quebec. She is currently completing an Ontario College diploma in interactive media design from Algonquin College in Ottawa, and she works on both personal documentary projects and freelance film and photography projects. Thank you for being with us today, Mikaela. And we do have Pappy here as well today, but he wants to be an audience member, so we'll see. But you can give a wave to Pappy in the audience there. Or sorry, the star, as Pappy has requested to be called today, as we all saw in the film. So Mikaela, to get started, what motivated you to make this film?
Yeah, well, first, I just quickly want to say thanks so much for having me. And I also just want to quickly take a moment to appreciate how beautiful the feature film that we saw today was. And I'm really honored to have Pappy's Garden screened alongside such a beautiful film. So thank you so much for that.
It's our pleasure. Thanks for sharing your story with us.
Yeah, well, I think what motivated me to make the film was ever since I was a little girl, I was always making little movies, in my with my little camcorder. And I always knew that there was a story with Pappy. I always knew I'd heard little bits and pieces of his immigration story to Canada, and I was always so interested in sharing that story. And there was a lot of rough cuts along the way since being a little girl and trying to figure out what the story I wanted to tell was. And something that I ended up deciding to go with moving forward was telling the story about the garden, because the garden, like my mom says in the film as well, it was a huge part of my childhood and her childhood. There was always a garden. And through my conversations with Pappy, I discovered that the garden is what brought him back to his memories in Jamaica. And so I thought, this is what I want my story to be, because it's something that everyone can connect to. And that was really important for me.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful part of the film of seeing like what the garden means to Pappy. So having grown up in that garden, what does the garden mean for you now?
The garden definitely reminds me of my childhood. And it's funny, I feel like we can all relate to the feeling of being a little kid in a big, luscious garden, and it feels like you're in the jungle. My mom, actually, when I was interviewing her, she said something that stuck with me. She said, even when they were just living in a small apartment in Toronto before Pappy had space for a garden, he would bring the garden inside. So their house was full of houseplants. And she said it was more like being in the jungle than being in an apartment in Toronto. So I think for me, the garden is my childhood, and it's a way that I connect with my family and where we're from.
For sure, that's beautiful. So how did you approach telling the story, or what sort of things were you thinking about when you first started making this documentary?
Yeah, like I said, the story went through a lot of different stages because I wasn't sure what I wanted the tone to be. I knew that there was hardships with Pappy's immigration, like so many people who immigrate, it's hard. And there was some emotional moments during interviews and during my research. And at first, I was started to think that this was going to be maybe a sadder story, maybe about the hardships of immigration. But I kind of, and I think a lot of documentary filmmakers especially will tell you this, when you get to the editing room, you're suddenly faced with some different paths that you can go down for how you're going to tell the story. And I went through a period of thinking that a documentary kind of had to be more political to be interesting. And of course, those types of documentaries are important. But I was sitting there looking at all my footage, and I started to think about who I was really making the film for. And I wanted to honor Pappy's memory, and I wanted to make a film that made him happy and made him feel good about his connection to his garden and where he's from. So I decided I don't want to make something that's political or sad about the difficulties of immigrating somewhere. I want to make something that will make people smile. And some people have told me that watching the film reminded them of their own garden or their own grandparents' garden, or just little things that remind them of wherever they're from. And that tells me that I made the right choice in the tone that I decided to go with approaching the story.
For sure, and it's so beautifully woven, and you get those various different layers of how, what a garden can mean, and also, those notes of the story of the immigration, but then also, how do you move on? How do you thrive, like your garden going forward, and all of those things, and those definitely came through really, really effectively. This probably ties into that. What would you like the audience to be taking away from your film, do you think, as you, or the audience today as they walk out of here?
Like I said, I think that what makes me the happiest when after people have watched the film and told me what they think about it, what brings me the most joy is when they start to tell me the small things that remind them of their hometown or their home country, or things that they saw their parents or their grandparents who maybe were immigrants do that brought them a little bit of joy. As someone who I grew up outside of Canada, and it's crazy. I think anyone who's lived in a country other than their home country will tell you just the little things from wherever you're from just bring you so much joy. I remember being in Switzerland and then coming home to Canada to visit and having Canadian maple syrup. I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing, all the memories. So whenever I think what I want audience to take back from watching the film is being reminded of the things that remind them of home. That's what makes me the happiest. Yeah.
For sure. As you said that, I lived in Ireland for a while, and there was one point in Dublin where I was in a market and people walked by talking about Tim Hortons. And it was like, what? How is that a thing? And there was apparently a Tim Hortons somewhere in Dublin. I never found it, but yeah, those weird connections, and the different greenery and different plants, and how you connect with those can be so meaningful. What does Pappy think of the film? Pappy, what do you think of the film? Do you want to share any thoughts?
I'm very grateful to Mikaela for making that film. And it just means a lot to me. Thank you. I don't have too much more to say.
I'm definitely really grateful that Pappy and my whole family have always been so supportive of my films. And as soon as I sat down with Pappy and I said, "Can I make a movie about you?" I mean, not everyone likes being in front of the camera. I'm lucky I get to be behind. So I know it's hard to be in front of the camera, but I'm so grateful that Pappy right away said yes, of course. So that was also important in my decision of the tone I wanted the film to take. Like I said, when I thought, who am I making this film for? I'm so grateful that Pappy opened himself up for me to share his story with audiences. And I thought, I just want to make something that makes him proud and makes him feel happy.
And I think at like the core of all really good documentary filmmaking is that relationship, and not the exploitative relationship that sometimes gets celebrated. Like, I think hopefully we're moving past that now and really looking at, what is the agency of the subjects? How are they honored? And are we kind of doing them justice? And I think that's a beautiful tribute to all of those different approaches, and a great way to think about making a documentary film. Does anyone have any questions for Mikaela?
Yeah. I right away I got the sense of how much family means to you, and how beautifully you've honored your grandfather. But the other question I also have is, where is this house? It just looks like a huge garden. Thank you.
Yeah, this is an interesting question. People have asked me this a lot. This was filmed actually in Wasaga Beach, which I'm sure many of you know. Yeah, and I made this film as part of my it was my senior thesis film in university. And when I was showing it to my class, a lot of people were saying, "Did you go to Jamaica to film this?" And I said, "No, this is just in Ontario." But my professor said he thought it was interesting that this is where Pappy ended up in Canada. I mean, Wasaga Beach is one of the longest beaches I think that we have here. And I think it's interesting as well that not only did he find a spot to do his beautiful gardening, but somewhere we don't have a lot of beaches in Canada, so somewhere close to water and sandy beaches. I thought that was interesting that that's where he found his home too. Yeah.
And there is this like great experience of warmth in it that like permeates through the whole film that I think also then connects further to that experience of Jamaica and like bringing Jamaica here and how that all connects and ties into Pappy's garden. That's really lovely. Other questions for Mikaela? Do you have garden tours? Everybody's going to be showing up to your house, Pappy. If we can just get the address afterwards.
I don't know about garden tours. I think that would be a great idea, but I will say I'm lucky because I've inherited this love of gardening and plants, and I love having as many plants as possible in my apartment. Even though I don't have a huge garden right now, I was growing some tomatoes outside on my balcony. And I'm lucky enough to be able to call Pappy whenever I want and say, why are my leaves yellowing? I need help. And he's so ready to answer and help me out with any of that. So yeah, I would love to be able to give some garden tours though, because Pappy's garden is amazing, really. And he's won awards for his gardening. Yeah, he's really talented. So I'm happy that I was able to show that.
There often are in different regions like pollinator tours. So maybe you can, if you have a lot of pollinator flowers, you can kind of get put on those tours and then people drive around on a given weekend and check out these pollinator tours. So you could go big. Any other questions? Yeah. Did Pappy have a garden in Jamaica?
Sorry. Going back to my childhood, he was a farmer, and he would occasionally give us a little plot, a piece of his land and he would teach us how to plant and grow things. We didn't have a flower garden as such, but there was a lot of fruit and vegetables that we grew. Oh, they were at flowers, but certainly not as you have in Canada. Yeah.
Okay. Any other final questions? All right. I think we can wrap it up there. Thank you so much for sharing your story, both of you, with us and being able to join us here for the Guelph Film Festival.
Thank you so much.